water that is coming to Southern California?
It's less actually reduced the amount of water that we have than it's raised the point that our water resources are finite. There's, they did start doing some actual conservation programs. They started getting the word out that we needed to conserve water. However, a lot of that was tied more to the recent fairly severe drought that we had, rather than the reduced pumping from the delta. The reduced pumping from the delta is important, but it's not the main focus of our water resources. In Orange County, for instance, 60% of our water comes from our aquifer. So we have excellent groundwater resources here. So when you look at that water balance that I talked about before, when 60% of our water is going to landscaping, if we just release our landscaping, we could survive completely just off our aquifer for our drinking water and manufacturing, et cetera.
So any other city that has an aquifer that it utilizes, something like Las Vegas has one, although they have sort of grown beyond that resource, as well as now growing beyond what they get from the Colorado River. Could they feasibly do what Orange County is doing in terms of replenishing their own aquifer by recycling their water?
Certainly, that's one of the cheapest and easiest ways to go. Everybody, when you start looking at water, one of the first things they look at is cost. First of all, we don't pay anywhere near enough for water, certainly in California. Only recently in Sacramento and Fresno, some of the larger cities in the Central Valley, did they even start requiring water meters on houses. They just paid a monthly bill, and it was just unlimited water use. What we're doing here in Orange County is as our price of water and our resources, our population's grown, we've focused more on recycling and finding local water sources that we can work on, because those are the cheapest way to go. The GWRS system recycles 70 million gallons a day, and that's all water that was previously just being dumped out into the ocean. And it really doesn't make much sense to import water all the way from the Delta or the Colorado River, use it, and then have to clean it up, remove pollutants or whatever else, and then dump it into the water when we can just clean it up and reuse it.
Is it likely that in Southern California in general that the water restrictions will become required, and instead of just sort of voluntary? I understand some areas there are certain requirements, but is it just sort of inevitable as we go along that the requirements will become stricter?
I think so. I think you're going to get two things. First of all, people are learning and just doing more to conserve water regularly. So it's becoming more of a way of life. When we had our serious drought just recently, there were finally some restrictions enacted, and watering days, that type of things. That's happened in the past. The sad part is that they lift those, because when they have those in, people realize they really didn't need to use as much water as they had in the past. But then, when supposedly we have all the water we need again, then they lift the restrictions, and water use tends to go up.
How is the drought and also the reduction in the flow in the San Joaquin River Delta affected ranching and agriculture throughout the state?
Well, one of the things, for instance, is the types of crops that were planted and used. When we had a long period of plenty of water, the Central Valley, they planted a lot of tree crops, nuts, apples, citrus, things like that require a lot of water. And in areas that traditionally didn't have those types of crops. The problem is then when you run into a drought, it's not like wheat, where when you have a bad year, you just don't plant your crop. If you've got an almond tree that you've been nursing along for 10 years, all of a sudden you've got a lot of dead almond trees. In fact, I went and bought firewood the other day at a local place, and I thought, man, he had a fabulous selection of firewood, all cherry, almond, orange, all this time. And I said, why do you have so much wood? And he said, the Central Valley is just chopping down trees left and right. They've got, because of the water shortage, they went ahead and had to get rid of a lot of trees. So put a lot of good firewood on the market.
Wow.
And also on like GWRS, if you want to ask me in a way so that you can, the question's structured differently or something like that,
Okay.
feel free to re-ask it, or something like that.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you guys have both covered that really well. We almost went and toured the facility and did that, but we, trying to fit as much as we can into the program. It's probably not something we'll have a lot of room for anyway.
Yeah.
But I was at Colin's request. I had it set up to do that, and then we decided maybe not to. And also that Las Vegas has a big reclaimed water, project where everything goes back into the Las Vegas Wash, which goes back into Lake Mead and it gives them return flow credits, which is very kind of similar. But I need to find out whether or not they can actually implement something like what Orange County does, or whether it would conflict with the one that they're already doing. I don't really know. I don't know if you're familiar enough with that to comment on that. But
Yeah, not their particular project.
Right. The allotment, obviously, that is divided up, based on the 1922.
The compact, yeah.
Is that is there any scenario in which California would entertain, the option of opening that up again for discussion and allocating to Nevada, say, just a little bit more water?
In 2008, during the presidential campaign, John McCain suggested that the compact should be reopened because of the changes in water uses and population amongst the various states. Ken Salazar, who then was a senator for Colorado and is currently the Secretary of the Interior, replied, "Over my dead body," and that is, I think that's pretty much the way everybody feels because. First of all, I think a reopening of the compact would probably be a better deal for the southern states, including possibly Nevada, but Colorado and the rest of them. When it comes to water, everybody's watching their back all the time. In California, we've got Northern California thinking that Southern California is trying to steal their water. You've got, it's tricky deals even between San Diego and the Imperial Valley Water District. It's everybody's very suspicious. And for instance, in the Imperial Valley Water District, they won't even let the farmers who do sell their water, they have to rotate who gets to sell their water because they don't want to have permanently fallowed fields. So they don't want in any way, shape, or form to not have the right to someday use that water again if they need to. So I think reopening the compact would be very difficult, if not impossible.
One of the alternatives that has been proposed for Las Vegas, and instead of building this pipeline, has been to help Southern California fund desalination projects in exchange for more allocation out of the Colorado River. Is that something that seems feasible? Or
it would. It's not something that I couldn't happen, but one of the biggest issues with that is the expense of desalination. So I mean, the water that California would basically be, if they were giving up a part of their Colorado River water, they would be giving up one of our cheapest sources of water for one of the most expensive sources of water in the world. So obviously that would have to be heavily subsidized by Nevada. Las Vegas, and I think that when they saw the price tag on that, it would be an unlikely situation.
Yeah, in early estimates were that would be too expensive many years ago. Now that desalination has come down a bit, and that the cost of their pipeline has actually gone up so much to be about $15 billion. So building a $15 billion pipeline to potentially an unsustainable source of water that could last 20 years or 50 years, inevitably, if they did that and then outgrow that water source, or it becomes one that they can no longer utilize, it seems like desalination or working with California or building their own pipeline to the ocean would inevitably be a direction they would have to go, or mitigating their growth. So that's some of what gets discussed, and the Southern Nevada Water Authority has said that it isn't likely to work because of getting the metropolitan water districts to all agree to work with Nevada, but we can't help but ask, is if it takes $2 billion to build a desalination plant, or $4 billion to build a couple of them, that could produce 100 to 150,000 acre feet of water, which is about what Las Vegas wants from the pipeline. That seems like even though it's very expensive, it's significantly less than a pipeline, and it's a sustainable source of water. So I'm curious your thoughts on that, as well as your thoughts on the challenges of desalination and the environmental consequences.
One of the things about water is that nobody, once they have it, nobody wants to give it up. So the idea that desal plants would be built here and that somehow we would give up some of our Colorado River allotment seems just very unlikely to me. Because even though we don't really need desalination right now, and there's no plans. Our recent urban water management plans, which plan out for the next 25 years, have no planned use of desalinated water for the next 25 years. We're relying on increasing output from our recycled water, urban runoff, recycling, all that type of thing. If it's here, it's awful hard to give it away. An example is what just happened in Rosarito, Mexico. So they were planning a desalination plant there specifically to ship water out to the San Diego area and possibly out of state. And then the government of Mexico decided that no, water's not going to be leaving Mexico. So that now you have one of the major funders for that plant looking to get out of it, and that looks like it's falling apart.
Interesting. I didn't know. I had heard the last that I had read on that was that they were threatening that they would never give up their water out of the Colorado for a desal plant, and were threatening that it wouldn't necessarily work, but it sounded like it was still in development. But you're saying that something very recent has.
I read an article just maybe a week or two ago.
Okay.
That it looked like it was dead, and I think that's just it's traditional. Like I said, there's something about water that nobody seems to want to give it up.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, according to the San Diego Water Authority yesterday, they were talking about that was a plan that was still in development.
Well, I'm sure it is, because these things never die.
Right.
I mean, Poseidon and Carlsbad's been under development for 10 years, and it looks like they may finally be able to get one going. There's no currently operational desalination plant on the Pacific Coast. The one in Tampa, which was built to supply 50 million gallons a day, similar to the ones proposed in California, is now running at 4 million gallons a day, specifically to keep the cost to their customers down. The water is so expensive, but by running the plant at the capacity that they had planned would just drive up water rates to the point that their customers won't have it.
And is it feasible that the technology will evolve using alternative fuels and alternative energies, solar energy, and as well as ways of mitigating the environmental issues, by using different intake, technologies? Is that something that could make desalination sustainable?
We think so. The National Academy of Sciences put out a report a while ago that talked about desalination, and what it said is that we have a lot to learn. It's going to play a role. I think everybody agrees it's going to play a role in our water supply. It's just too early right now. The technology isn't there. We haven't got the technology to not have the environmental impacts on the ocean where we're taking the water in. Right now it uses so much energy that the greenhouse gas emissions and all that type of stuff is a serious problem. When we talk about moving to potentially powering it through wind power, solar, things like that, those are, when they say green technologies, they're greener. A solar panel still needs to take up space. It still has a carbon footprint, all those type of things. So the cheapest, easiest way to do is, first of all, is conserve our way out of as much water as we, just don't use it if we don't need it. And then make sure we're not wasting any of it. Recycle every drop that we have. And there's a lot of resources. For instance, there's a stream just down the road from this office that puts out 30 million gallons a day of urban runoff. Why build a desal plant that we need to pump in salt water that is very expensive to process, Well, we can take already fresh water that's being wasted and just clean that up and pump it right into our system and use it that way.
Well, that sounds like, I mean, such an obvious question. Why wouldn't someone have already tried to utilize that resource that you're talking about?
The facilities aren't there, so it's a matter of part of the problem, and why desal is being placed where it is right now is they're co-locating them primarily with power plants. And the reason for that is so that they don't have to build intake facilities. They can take advantage of hot water. It makes it a lot cheaper to process, to desalinate the water if it's heated rather than using cold water. So they're really trying to take advantage of those facilities. And that's why the GWRS plant is where it is. You had this ready stream of water that was being dumped into the ocean, so it was easy to just tap right into it at the source and use it there. With the creek, you'd have to build some kind of a pumping facility and a pipeline, and all those things are expensive and a little more difficult to engineer.
Do you believe that climate change is something that inevitably is going to result in less water, not only throughout the country but throughout the world?
It certainly looks like, I can't comment on the country and the world as a whole, but I was just at a conference today that was looking at maps of predicted changes in rainfall amounts, and it certainly looks like the Southwest is going to be taking a hit from climate change. So if things pan out the way that they're predicted, or even if they're not quite as bad as they're predicted, we're definitely going to be in for a water shortage. On top of that, we just have a growing population. The Southwest is one of the most popular areas of the country. People are going to keep coming, and so that's going to require more water to manage the needs of those people.
Are there projections of how much the Colorado River might reduce its flow due to climate change in the next coming decade?
I've seen estimates ranging from 10 to 20%, but I think that's very speculative. The bottom line is we know that we need to be cautious. We need to be cautious about our water reserves. We've made mistakes in the past. Probably when the compact was made, that was a high water period. We're now living with less water than we were then, and we may be living with less water than we were in the future. And you just don't want to make that mistake on gambling. You're going to have more water than you need.
Right. Do you think that I know that you've mentioned that desalination isn't necessarily needed now if conservation measures were implemented. Colin mentioned a very interesting point about how the Metropolitan Water District has acknowledged that they lose about 9% of their water, that it kind of goes missing, and that they believe that's due to leaks that could be repaired. That sounds like a pretty significant amount of water. Is that something you know much about or heard much about?
We haven't even touched on the amount of water that can be saved just by things such as fixing leaks. For instance, a big part of the water that's being sold to San Diego from the Imperial Valley is going to come from them concrete lining their irrigation ditches, things like that. Right now, they literally have the All-American Canal at one point runs through a dune field. So you can imagine the water loss through a dune field. So they're concreting those areas, they're concreting the rest of their ditches. It's going to result in massive water savings due to a lack of water being just infiltrating off into the soil. In fact, it's so significant that the farmers on the Mexican side of the border actually sued the United States over the lining of the canal, because that so much water leaked out of the All-American Canal that's been pumped out of the ground and used as irrigation water in the Mexicali area for decades.
So what would prevent such simple steps in terms of fixing pipes and lining the infrastructure to make the water use so much more efficient? what would prevent that from just happening?
It's a matter of creating a benefit for the people who would need to do that. Right now, for instance, if you're an agricultural user, you're paying very little for your water, and you've got vested water rights. You're the first one in line, so you're going to get what you need, and you're using that. So unless there's a way, for instance, as in the Imperial Valley, where you can recover the cost of all that concrete, and it is a significant cost, recover that cost and probably even turn a profit, there's not a lot of incentive for you to do that. So I think that's one of the things we need to do, is develop ways where we can transfer water and sell water to other areas that need it, and effect these changes that can easily conserve millions of acre feet. An example was that it would probably, I don't know, but it may be cheaper for Nevada to concrete line all of the irrigation ditches in the Central Valley, and get their water that way, than to build desal plants, and it would certainly be better for the environment.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, all of those projects obviously cost money, and it would seem like that would be, if there was a way for them to support
Mm-hmm.
like that.
So if the farmer gets 10 acre feet of water, and one of it traditionally leaches out, then he concretes it up and he's able to sell that acre foot of water. Then that's going to be a benefit to him, and it's going to be an incentive to do that.
Are organizations like the Coast Keeper and other organizations pushing to see these changes in the infrastructure happen?
Absolutely. One of the things we need to do is provide solutions. It's not enough to just say, no, this isn't a right way to do things, or no, we don't want to do this. We need to provide a solution. So that's why what we've really focused on is start off with conservation, do as much conservation as we can, and we're making a lot of progress on conservation, and then get into the recycling. Recycle as much as you can, recycle every drop of that. And then when it really gets down to it, then if you need to do desalination, for one thing, it'll be further down the line. We'll have better technology. We'll be able to site these plants better, and we'll do a better job at desalination. It'll also be a lot more cost effective.
That was a very good summary.
Which translates to that most likely you'll win the show.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. You guys have both been great. I thought, as you were talking, thoughts come and go as you were trying to keep up with things. I'm just trying to make sure any other thoughts that you have in terms of the message that you want to see presented out there to people in terms of water in general, water usage? I know you just kind of summarized, conserving and recycling. Is there a philosophical, sort of approach to this as well, in terms of the sacredness of water and the way that cities should manage not only their water but their development in terms of the resources available? Does a city like Las Vegas, that's in a desert, that's already grown beyond its resource, does it have the right to just sort of reach out into areas maybe that are producing its food and to ranches and take from that in order to continue to grow, or does growth need to be mitigated in order for our survival? And I know that that's just kind of a microcosm of a larger issue that goes on all over the world.
Well, I think the bottom line is just learning to live within our means. Certain places have certain resources, and you're only going to be able to do about so much with those. One of the things I'd say is that Southern California has a lot to learn from the Las Vegas area and other places in Arizona in landscaping. Right now, there's a big program in Las Vegas. Turf is a no-no. Get rid of the turf. Well, I said when we're talking about 60% of our water going to turf, there's a lot of incentive to get rid of that. When I drive around in areas of Arizona where my in-laws live, they have beautiful yards that that do not have all this water hogging plants, stuff like that. And that's because they're living in the reality. They live in their landscape. They live in Arizona. Well, California really, while we're not a desert, Southern California does not have an abundance of water. So whenever I go to someplace and, I see tropical palms and things like that in somebody's backyard, yeah, that can be a calming and a nice environment for them to relax in. But you're not living in your landscape. You're not living in Southern California. It's if you want to live in Hawaii, or maybe it's a good time, go vacation there. But we should be living within our means, and I think it's the same thing in wherever you're at.
Oh, that was well said. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
As I said, glad to help out. So I'm very interested to hear how this all turns out. So this is going to be, they're going to be hearing it in Carson City.
They have
That's kind of the final decision on whether they will have